Hello, all you casual nerds. It's story time once again. Today's story is Hobnail. It's a horror story, kind of, but it's a children's horror story. It's PG, is what the rating was. It's going to be exciting. It's by Crystal Arbogast. Say that 10 times fast. All right, we're just gonna jump right into this shit. Like, no fear. Fanny Poteet sat cross-legged on her Uncle John's front porch. I wonder if it's some kind of allegory or something. Her favorite rag doll clutched under one arm. The late afternoon sun shone through the leaves of the giant oak tree, casting its flickering light on the cabin. This golden motion of light entranced the child, and she sat with her face turned upward as if hypnotized. The steady hum of conversation flowed from inside the cabin. "Ellen, I'm sure happy that you came to church with us today. Why don't you spend the night? It's getting awfully late, and it will be dark before you make it home, and, murderers and shit." "I'll be fine, Sally," replied Fanny's mother. "Anyhow," yeah, well, I read that right. "Anyhow, you know how Lige? L-I-G-E. Lige? You know how Lige is about his supper? I left plenty for him and the boys on the back of the stove, but he'll want Fanny and me home because he's controlling and it's really an unhealthy relationship. Besides, he'll want to hear if Sam Bosworth's wife managed to drag him to church." The laughter that followed her mother's statement broke the child's musings, and she stood up, pulled her dress over the protruding petticoat, and stepped inside. Scroll. "Get your shawl, Fanny. When the sun goes down, it'll get chilly, and I'm damned if you're not going to look like Stevie Nicks when we leave this house." As the little girl went to the chair by the fireplace to retrieve her wrap, her uncle came in from the back with a lantern, because apparently it's the 1920s. "You'll need this, Ellen. The wick is new, and I've filled it up for you." "I appreciate it, Johnny," said Ellen. "I'll have Lige bring it back when he goes to town next week." Ellen kissed her young brother goodbye and hugged Sally gently. Patting her sister-in-law on the swollen belly, she said, "I'll be back at the end of the month. Don't be lifting anything heavy. If that queasy feeling keeps bothering you, brew some of that mint tea I left in the kitchen and smoke some of that dank herb. Lord knows I have never seen a baby keep its mammy so sick as this one has. It's a boy for sure. Anti-misogyny at its prime." Upon hearing this, Fanny frowned. She was the youngest in her family and the only girl. After living with 4 brothers, she had prayed fervently to God every night for him to let her aunt have a girl. The only other comfort she had was the pretty rag doll that her mother had made for her, which is definitely important to the story in some way because there's a strange amount of emphasis on something that shouldn't be important. Tucking the doll under her arm and gathering the shawl with the same hand, she stood waiting patiently. Aunt Sally kissed her lightly on the cheek and squeezed Fanny gently. "If I have a girl, I hope that she will be as sweet as you," her aunt whispered. Uncle John patted her on the head and said, "Bye, Punkin." Not spelled correctly, but P-U-N-K-N, Punkin. "When that old mama cat has her kittens, I'll give you the pick of the litter." Bribing children with pets has always historically been a good idea. This brought a smile to Franny's face and swept away the darkening thoughts of boys. Ellen secured her own shawl about the shoulders and, tossing one side and over again, picked up the lantern which had already been lit, grabbing her Stevie Nicks mixtape on the way out. Taking Fanny's right hand, the pair proceeded on the 3-mile trek back home. Apparently they're walking. Heavy rains during the last week had left the dirt road virtually impassable for anyone on foot. Not sure if we're in the, 1800s or if they're just Mormons. Ellen and her daughter would return home from the way they had come by following the railroad track. The track was about 1/2 mile above the road. Oh, yeah. It wound and wound around the mountains and through the valleys, carrying the coal and lumber which had been harvested from the land. Once on track, they proceeded in the direction of their own home. Ellen began to tell Franny about the trains and all the distant places they went to. The little girl loved hearing her mother's stories of all the big cities far away. She had been to town only a few times and had never traveled outside of Wise County. Franny had remembered her papa talking about his brother Jack. Uncle Jack had left the county as well as the state of Virginia. He was in a faraway place called Cuba. It's in quotation marks. What the fuck? Cuba. Fighting for a man called Roosevelt against a man named Castro. and it'll eventually develop into a missile crisis. She wondered what kind of place Cuba was and if it was anything like home and if her dad would bring her some cigars. The sun's last rays were sinking behind the tree-studded mountains. Shadows rose ominously from the dense woods on both sides of the track. Rustling sounds from the brush caused Fanny to jump, but her mother's soothing voice calmed her fears. "It's all right, child. Just foxes and possums." A hoot owl's mournful cry floated out of the encroaching darkness, and Fanny tightened her grip on her mother's hand. Apparently not everyone is fond of owls. Finally, night enveloped the landscape, and all that could be seen was the warm glow of the lantern and the shadow of the figures behind it. It was a moonless night, and the faint glow of a few stars faded in between the moving clouds. Fanny tripped over the chunks of gravel scattered between the ties, and Ellen realized that her daughter was tired. Maybe because it's like midnight, and you're walking through the fucking forest. "We'll rest a while, child. My guess is that we have less than a mile to go." Ellen set the lantern down, and the weary travelers attempted to get comfortable on the sitting rail. "Mammy, it's so scary in the dark. Will God watch over us and protect us?" "Sure," said. "Yes, Fanny. Remember what the new young preacher said in church today. The good Lord is always with you, and when you do need his strength, call out his name. Better still, do what I do." "What's that, Mammy?" "Well," Ellen said, stroking her daughter's hair, "I sing one of my favorite hymns." While contemplating her mother's advice, Fanny was distracted by a sound. The sound came from the direction they had traveled from. The girl's eyes peered into the ink-like darkness. It was very faint, but unlike the other noises she had grown used to along the way, the slow, methodic sound was someone walking and coming in their direction. Dun, 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 dun. "Mammy, do you hear that?" "Hear what, child?" Fanny moved closer to her mother and said, "It's someone else coming." Ellen gave her daughter a comforting hug and replied, "You're just imagining things, Fanny. I can't hear footsteps because clearly I'm deaf as shit. We've rested long enough. Let's get on home. Your papa will be worried, and we need to get you checked into a psych ward sometime in the morning." Ellen picked up the lantern, took Fanny's hand, and the two resumed their journey. After a while, the sound that hit a nerve the little girl began again. This time, the steps were more distinct and definitely closer. The distant ringing of heavy boots echoed in the dark. "Mammy, I hear it again." "Hush, child, you're just a lunatic." Ellen swung the lantern around. "See, there's nothing there. Or, if there is, it's just simply outside of the view of the lantern." Fanny secured the grip of her mother's hand and clutched her rag doll tightly. The hoot owl continued its call in the distance, and the night breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. "The air sure smells like rain." "The wind is picking up a mite, too. We'll be home soon, little girl. Yonder is the last bend." The last yonder bender. Fanny found comfort in her mother's voice, but the darkness behind them, the steps rang louder. It was the sound of boots. Heavy hobnail boots. They said it. "Mammy, it's getting closer." Ellen swung the lantern around again and said, "Child, there's nothing out there. Tell you what, let's sing Precious Lord, 'kay?" Fanny joined in with her mother, but her voice quivered with fear as the heavy steps came closer and closer, and her mother remained completely deaf, apparently. She couldn't understand why her mother seemed oblivious to the sound. Perhaps it's a plot point. Ellen's singing grew louder, and up ahead the warm glow of light from their own home glimmered down the side through the trees. A dog barking in the distance brought the singing to an abrupt end. "See, child, we're almost home. Tinker will be running up to meet us. Big old Tinker. He's chased mountain lions before. He'll see us safely home." That's a big-ass dog. "Let's hurry then, Mammy. Can't you hear? It's closer and I'm scared. Let's run." "All right, child. But see, I'm telling you, there's nothing there." Ellen made another sweep around with her lantern as they proceeded, and she cried out, "Here, Tinker. Come on, boy." The dog raced up the path leading to the track, and the two nearly collided with him as they stepped on the familiar trail home. "Ellen, is that you?" Fanny's heart filled with joy as her father's voice rang out of the darkness. "Yes, Liege. I'm sorry we're so late. I'm afraid I walked a bit fast for this child. She's worn out." Elijah picked up his daughter and carried her the rest of the way home. Once inside the cabin, Ellen helped Fanny, I don't know where I'm putting that R in, undress and gently tucked her in bed. The comforting sounds of her parents' voice drifted from the kitchen. Even the snores of her brothers in the back made her smile and be thankful that she and her mother were safe and sound. Before closing her eyes, her mother's voice rang in her ears. Liege, I heard the steps. I didn't want to frighten the child. I kept singing and swinging the lantern around and telling her there was nothing to be afraid of. But Liege, just before we got off the tracks, I turned the lantern around one last time, and that's when I saw what was following, as it was a figure of a man. A man without a head! Ooh, shit's so fucking spooky. So anyway, that's story time number 2. Next time we're probably going to go into like a little more actual scary horror instead of just all plot dropped at once. But anyway, thanks for enjoying story time, and I hope you had a good one.